Hello everyone and welcome to the Hockey Hub. So today we're doing another team preview, and we're going to be looking at this in the same style as all the other team previews, so if you haven't checked those out, I suggest you do so. Today we're looking at the Chicago Blackhawks, and the Blackhawks have recently announced that they are going into a full rebuild. They sent a letter out to their fans, and that's going to be very interesting to see what happens with their star players and everything, but we're going to get on with what they actually added this offseason. Now, the Chicago Blackhawks didn't necessarily make a big splash or anything, and I don't think many people expected them to. They did make a couple of good, cheaper signings in Matthias Janmark and Lucas Wallmark. I think those are really good pickups for Chicago. Both those guys are capable of playing a third-line role, and Chicago does have decent forward depth, so maybe even fourth line. I do think that they should fit in very well in their bottom six, and Chicago fans should be quite happy with those signings. They also got Nikita Zadorov from the Colorado Avalanche. Zadorov, it's kind of questionable to see where he's going to land. I imagine that they're expecting him to play a top four role for them. They have talked very highly of him, and they see a lot of potential in him. He hasn't exactly reached a lot of that potential in his first couple of years in Colorado. He was a 15th overall pick, I believe, and at this point he's kind of just looked like a physical bottom pair blue liner, but maybe he can finally come into his own with Chicago, where he's kind of been given the keys to that defense, really. He was playing behind so many good defensemen in Colorado, but hopefully in Chicago he'll actually have a chance to shine. That's really all they added this offseason, though. But if you look at what they lost, this is where the offseason looks tough for Chicago. Now, Chicago lost Corey Crawford to free agency, and that one kind of surprised me. I figured that they would at least be able to keep Crawford, especially since they traded Robin Leonard at the trade deadline, but they let him walk in free agency. They traded away Brandon Saad, and in my opinion, I do not think they got back fair value for him. Saad is definitely better than Zadorov. I understand that Zadorov is younger, but Saad is simply a lot better. They also lost Drake Kachula. They chose not to qualify him. He was a solid, third liner. I don't think that's necessarily a big loss, especially when you consider they got Lucas Wallmark and Matthias Janmark to fill in that role. They also traded away Olli Maatta. Now, Olli Maatta really didn't fit in well in Chicago, so that's not a big loss, and they let Slater Cuckoo walk, so they really just lost some defensive depth there. But to me, the thing that really hurts is losing both Crawford and Saad, and really not getting a lot back for either of them. Crawford obviously left in free agency, and then Saad only really getting back Zadorov. I think that's definitely a big step back for their team, and clearly their players felt so as well. Now, Chicago still really does have a good top six with Kubalik, Toews, maybe Strome on that right wing. I don't know where Strome fits right now. He still has yet to sign a contract. And then DeBrincat, Kirby Dach, and Patrick Kane. Patrick Kane and Jonathan Toews are still two really good players, especially Patrick Kane. Kane seems to be getting better offensively year after year and just had another fantastic offensive year. Jonathan Toews in the playoffs proved he still has a lot to give, and I still think he has some very good years left in him, so those two are still going to be a great duo for years to come. There's also the youngster Kirby Dach, who really showed a lot this past year's playoffs, and I think Kirby Dach has a lot of potential. Kirby Dach could end up being the best player from that 2019 draft, and I am expecting a big year out of him this year. So the top six is really solid, and overall forward is not an issue with Chicago. It's goaltending and defense, and we're going to look at the defense now. Now, looking at their top four, there is a lot of questions with this top four. Duncan Keith is still probably the undisputed number one defenseman there, and although he has declined quite a bit, he is older. He's still a solid defender. On a good team, I think he's probably a second pairing guy, but he doesn't hurt as a top pairing option. He's still quite good. Then there's Adam Boqvist, which if Boqvist can actually really come into his own and have a big year, that could make Chicago's blue line look a lot better. He just oozes potential and was solid in the games he played with Chicago this year. Then there's Nikita Zadorov on that left side. Zadorov is a solid defensive defenseman and hopefully can really blossom in Chicago and maybe look like a bit more than what he looked like in Colorado. And then I guess Connor Murphy on that right side. Maybe Calvin DeHaan, but I think Murphy's probably the top four option for them there. Their defense overall is probably one of the weakest in the NHL. There is a few solid guys there, but their overall depth isn't very good. Seabrook might have to play a big role for them this year, and Seabrook, quite honestly, is not even half the player he once was. Injuries and age have really hit Seabrook hard, and that contract is just looking really bad right now. So Chicago is in desperate need of some blue line help. If they're able to get a top draft pick next year and maybe draft a guy like Owen Power or Brant Clark, that could really be good for their franchise. But moving on to their goaltending. Now, in my opinion, they quite simply have the worst goaltending tandem in the NHL. Malcolm Subban is not a starter. He's barely even a backup. And right now, it's looking like he's going to have to be the starter in Chicago. And then I guess the backup is Colin Delia. That tandem is just really bad. That's more an AHL level tandem than an NHL level tandem. Subban did have a lot of potential when he was drafted, so maybe he surprises everybody and actually looks like a semi-decent starter, maybe a fringe starter, but I just don't see it, especially when he's going to have to play behind a brutal defense. I honestly feel bad for Malcolm Subban at this point. It's going to be a rough year for Chicago on the defensive side of things and in net. But going on to their best players. Now, their best players is still a lot of that core from their Stanley Cup runs and the big three in Kane, Toews, and Keith. Those guys are still all really good. Keith, I think, is a step behind. Toews is still a solid first-line center, though, and Kane is still one of the best wingers in the NHL, and that's pretty much undisputed, unless you're an analytics nerd and really big on, how many offensive zone starts he had. Kane's offensive presence is still one of the best in the league, and he's still one of the best offensive forces in the NHL. I don't understand people that say he's not good. I get that he's not a good defensive winger, but his job is not to be a good two-way winger. It's to score goals, it's to, set up nice plays, and Kane is one of the best of the league in doing so. They've also got Alex DeBrincat, who had a bit of a down year this past year, but I think can bounce back. It amazes me how he was passed over so much on the draft, but that's probably because of his smaller stature. Same thing kind of happened to Cole Caulfield as well. And then I guess you could throw in Kubalik there as the fifth man. Kubalik had a very good rookie year and was a Calder nominee. He was the only rookie to hit 30 goals, and maybe he could be the next Artemi Panarin type. And if I was a Chicago fan, I hope he wouldn't get the Artemi Panarin treatment of being traded back for Brandon Saad in a few years. Chicago's players are still really good. It's the goaltending and defensive depth that really hurts Chicago. Their forward core is very solid, and four of their best players are, great forwards. And then, there's also a guy like Dylan Strome who looked really good, and I think Kirby Dach is going to push himself into this top five very soon. But moving on to players I think we should talk about. Now, I'd say Alex DeBrincat is a player we should talk about. He was a 40-goal scorer 2 years ago, and then this year, really, there wasn't much in the goal-scoring department at all. He was around 20 goals, and for how much he's getting paid, and, considering the minutes he gets, I know that was a big disappointment for Chicago fans. If he can bounce back, he looked like an offensive star a couple seasons ago, and he was quite good in his rookie year as well. So Chicago fans really need DeBrincat to bounce back, and he's being counted on as one of these core pieces for Chicago in the future. But another core piece for Chicago is Kirby Dach. Now, Kirby Dach, I think, is fantastic. He just oozes skill. He's got such good hands. He's such a big, smart centerman. And we saw in the playoffs, he was really dominant. Maybe he didn't put up a lot of offensive numbers, but you saw him out there. He was finishing his checks. He was playing hard, creating chances. I really like Kirby Dach. I think he has the potential to be the best player from the 2019 draft. And I know going into the Team Canada, for the World Juniors and everything, I'm really excited to see Dach play for Team Canada. He just had this beautiful skate pass in practice a couple days ago, and you can just see the potential with Dach. He's fantastic, and he's going to be fantastic for a long time. But another player I want to talk about is Jonathan Toews. Dach is like the successor to what Toews has been, I guess. Toews is one of the greatest Chicago Blackhawks of all time, and their captain, and he's been their captain for what feels like forever, but I wonder if he could be a guy Chicago could potentially look at moving. Toews was openly fed up with some of the offseason moves they've made, and Toews still feels like they could have had the chance to be a contender. So I don't know if a rebuild is going to sit well with a proud guy like Jonathan Toews. He's got 3 Stanley Cup rings, he's got 2 Olympic gold medals, he is a winner, he is meant to be on winning teams, and with Chicago admitting that they're going to be a rebuilder for the next couple of years, Toews could be a guy they look at moving on from. The question with Toews is, would anybody take him with that massive contract? If Toews was so much as $2 million cheaper, I think you'd see a lot more trade rumors, but considering how much Toews gets paid, I don't know if Chicago is going to be able to move him for fair value. You don't want to trade Toews just because you're doing a rebuild and get nothing back from him just because of his contract. In that case, you're better to hold on to him and hope that maybe in 3 or 4 years when Chicago comes out of this rebuild that he's still going to be an effective piece for them. So I'm patiently waiting to see what Chicago does with Jonathan Toews. He is one of my favorite players in the league, and I do hope he sticks around in Chicago. He's been a Chicago Blackhawk for forever, and I feel like he's a guy that should retire there, but who knows if the team has different plans. the category that I would put Chicago in is definitely rebuilder. Chicago could end up being one of the worst teams in the NHL next season. I still think they're going to score a lot. Like I've said before, their forward core is still really good. It's just their defense is so bad, and their goaltending is somehow even worse. Chicago fans should brace themselves. It's going to be a tough year. Hopefully they can get a high-end draft pick and maybe draft a guy, like Owen Power. There is a few good players up for grabs in next year's draft, but the draft is going to be interesting. Considering COVID, it makes scouting a lot more difficult, and a lot of these players aren't going to have places to play. The OHL isn't going to have body checking, so that really affects a lot of defenders' games, and I definitely think Chicago does have the mindset of drafting a defender next year, especially since there's so many good defensemen available in next year's draft class. So it's going to be a tough year for Chicago. I think we all saw it coming, and they're definitely a rebuilder. But that does it for today's video. I appreciate you guys watching till the end. Please leave a like, comment, subscribe if you haven't already, and I will see you guys later. Bye for now.